The shadow in the garage. It began with whispers among the hospital staff, nurses speaking in hushed tones over coffee, doctors exchanging uneasy glances in the corridors. None of them dared to admit it out loud, but everyone had seen him at least once. The figure in the armored suit, the helmet painted with a mouthful of jagged, grinning teeth. He never came inside. He didn't have to. The first sightings. At first, it was the night shift residents who noticed. Stepping into the parking garage after a grueling 12-hour shift, they would catch a glimpse of him leaning against a concrete pillar, visor dark, the reflection of the overhead lights glinting across the predatory grin on his helmet. By the time they blinked, he'd be gone. But the sound lingered, boots on cement, Metzer cement, measured and heavy, echoing through the emptiness. One doctor described it as being studied, the way a predator waits just outside the tree line. Another admitted her heart nearly gave out when she saw the reflective visor tilt toward her car. Why doctors fear him. No one knew his name. Rumors spread like wildfire, twisting and growing with each retelling. Some swore he was a disgraced surgeon who'd lost his license after a string of mysterious patient deaths. Others whispered he was a ghost in armor, the embodiment of every mistake a doctor tried to bury. A few even claimed that if you locked eyes with the snarling helmet, you'd feel your own pulse quicken, as if he could reach inside and grip your heart without ever laying a hand on you. And maybe he could. Because every doctor who'd encountered him reported the same thing, a sudden racing heartbeat, pounding in their ears, their chest tightening as though the figure was squeezing their fear into existence. The hospital's unspoken rule. Now, an unspoken rule lingers in the hospital halls. Never look too long in the garage mirrors. Don't linger by the stairwells at night. And if you hear footsteps echoing behind you when the lot should be empty, don't turn around. Some say he only comes for those who've harmed their patients, a form of twisted justice. Others believe he doesn't need a reason at all. But one thing is certain. Every time a doctor sees that helmet, whether by the flicker of a security light or the reflection in their car window, their heart skips, then hammers faster, and they pray they aren't the reason he's come. The doctor in the garage. Dr. Callahan had finished his shift well past midnight. The hospital's fluorescent glow was fading behind him as he stepped into the dim parking garage, his footsteps echoing against concrete. He clutched his keys tighter than usual. Sleep deprivation made him jittery, but this wasn't just exhaustion. It was that feeling, the one that had been circling in rumors for weeks, the feeling that someone was always watching. And then he froze. Not far ahead, in the space between two support pillars, the figure stood. Broad shoulders armored in steel, the chest plate catching the faint glint of overhead lights. But it was the helmet, the jagged, painted teeth, wide and grinning, that made Dr. Callahan's pulse lurch. He swore he could hear his heartbeat echoing in the silence. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, looked again. Gone. Into the car. Callahan forced himself forward, fumbling to unlock his car. He slid into the driver's seat, hands trembling against the steering wheel. He exhaled, chest heaving, trying to convince himself it was nothing more than fatigue. But then he glanced up. The rearview mirror reflected more than the dim garage lights. Behind his car, standing in the shadows, was the figure. Perfectly still. The helmet tilted ever so slightly, as if the teeth were smiling just for him. Callahan spun around in his seat. Empty. Nothing but rows of cars and concrete. The pulse now. His heartbeat wasn't just fast, it was violent, hammering against his ribcage. He swore he could feel pressure tightening around his chest, invisible fingers squeezing. His training told him he wasn't having a heart attack, but his instincts screamed otherwise. The doctor yanked the gear shift into reverse, tires squealing against the concrete as he tore out of the space. He didn't care about the noise, didn't care about protocol. He only cared about getting out. But as he sped toward the garage exit, he caught one last glimpse in the mirror. The figure wasn't chasing him. He didn't need to. He was just watching. And even as the night swallowed the hospital behind him, Callahan couldn't escape the pounding in his chest, or the certainty that the figure would be waiting again. The silent understanding. The next night, Dr. Callahan tried to convince himself it was just fatigue, that the helmeted figure was nothing more than his mind playing tricks after too many hours on call. But when he arrived at the hospital, he noticed something strange. The security guards knew. He realized it in the way they moved, the way their eyes slid toward the darker corners of the parking garage. One of them, a grizzled old veteran named Martinez, lingered near the entrance, sipping his coffee. His posture looked relaxed, but his gaze kept flicking toward the upper levels. Security's secret. On his way in, Callahan tried to make conversation. "You ever notice anything strange around here?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. Martinez didn't even look at him. He just shrugged. "Strange is part of the job, Doc, but some things don't need questioning." That answer did nothing to calm him. Later, Callahan overheard two younger guards talking near the elevators. "Yeah, I've seen him," one muttered. "Helmet guy. Doesn't do anything, though," the other said. "Just stands there, like he's waiting." "Yeah, well," the first guard said, lowering his voice, "waiting's enough." They left it at that, neither eager to say more. The silent pact. The strange truth settled in Callahan's chest like a stone. Hospital security knew about the figure. They had seen him, maybe more than once. And yet no one had tried to chase him off. No police reports, no investigations, because he never hurt anyone. He didn't vandalize cars, didn't break windows, didn't assault staff. He only watched. And in the unspoken hierarchy of fear, that was somehow worse. The guards had made their peace with it, an unspoken pact. As long as he didn't interfere, neither would they. Callahan's realization that night, as Callahan walked back to his car, he found himself glancing toward the far corner of the garage. Sure enough, there was a figure half hidden in shadow, visor glinting faintly under the fluorescent lights. Security didn't react. They didn't even glance in that direction. Callahan's pulse quickened, chest tightening like before. It wasn't just him. It was everyone. They all felt it. The silent pressure of being watched by something they couldn't name, couldn't stop, and dared not provoke. And that's when it hit him. It wasn't that the figure couldn't hurt anyone. It was that he didn't need to. The night of silence. Dr. Callahan thought he'd grown used to the idea of the figure, that dark silhouette, the teeth painted across the helmet, the pressure in his chest whenever those unseen eyes fell on him. He thought he had it under control, until the night the danger came from somewhere else. The ambush. He had stayed late again. Paperwork, charts, and a string of cases that never seemed to end. By the time he trudged into the garage, it was almost 2 in the morning. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows between the cars. That's when he heard the footsteps. Not the heavy, deliberate boots of the figure, but fast, erratic, carrying intent. 2 men emerged from behind a row of cars, faces shadowed, voices low. Callahan froze, his pulse spiking instantly. He could tell from the way they moved, the way one of them gripped something metallic in his hand, that this wasn't random. He tried to back away, but before he could, a hand yanked him hard by the collar and shoved him against a pillar. And then, everything stopped. The figure appears. From the darkness near the far corner, he appeared, armor gleaming faintly under the lights, visor reflecting like a dead star. The helmet grinned wide as ever, those painted teeth catching the dim glow. The attackers noticed too late. A blur of armored motion struck, silent and brutal. One man was slammed against a car hood, weapons skittering away across the concrete. The other barely managed to shout before a gauntleted fist silenced him, leaving him sprawled on the floor, groaning. Callahan stumbled backward, heart hammering like a war drum, until he felt himself pushed gently but firmly behind a nearby concrete wall. The warning. The figure crouched low beside him, one gloved hand braced on the wall, the other raised, a single finger pressed to the teeth of his helmet. Quiet. Callahan couldn't breathe. He could hear his own pulse pounding in his ears, and for a terrifying moment he thought the figure could hear it too, like some predator keyed in on the rhythm of his heart. The attackers staggered, cursed under their breath, then fled into the shadows. The sound of their retreating footsteps echoed away until the garage was silent again. The gesture. Slowly, the figure rose to his full height. Callahan stayed crouched, trembling, too terrified to move. His chest burned from the force of his own heartbeat, and still he didn't dare breathe too loud. Then the figure did something unexpected. He turned back to the doctor, visor tilted down, and extended a gloved hand. Callahan hesitated, his fingers twitching, uncertain, before finally reaching out. The grip was firm, steady, and pulled him easily to his feet. The figure placed one hand on Callahan's shoulder, steadying him, and for a moment the doctor felt a strange reassurance beneath the fear. No words, no sound, just the quiet pressure of armored fingers. Then release. The aftermath. The figure stepped back into the shadows, vanishing as if he'd never been there. Callahan staggered to his car, forcing his shaking hands to unlock the door. He collapsed into the driver's seat, lungs heaving, heart racing so hard he thought it might tear itself out of his chest. As he gripped the wheel, one thought drowned out all others. He had just been saved by the very thing that terrified him most. And he knew, deep down, he'd never look at that helmet the same way again. The doctor's story. Dr. Callahan didn't sleep that night. He sat in his car outside his home for hours, staring at the steering wheel, chest still tight from the memory of that gloved hand pressing him down, shielding him. The jagged teeth painted across the helmet kept flashing in his mind's eye. He should have been terrified. He was terrified. But he was alive, the telling. The next day, in the physician's lounge, he couldn't hold it in. He leaned forward in his chair, his voice low but urgent as he told the story to a couple of colleagues. "I saw him," he whispered. "The figure. But he saved me." The others froze. One of the nurses dropped her coffee stirrer, eyes wide. "Saved you?" Callahan nodded. He described the attackers, the sudden blur of armored movement, the way the figure had pressed a finger to the helmet and gestured for silence. He spoke of the hand on his shoulder, steady, grounding. "He could have left me there, but he didn't. He protected me." The ripple words spread fast. Rumors always did, but this one was different. For years, the figure had been nothing more than a phantom to them, an omen in the shadows, a thing to fear. But now, for the first time, there was a story that ended not with dread, but with survival. Some dismissed it as exhaustion and nerves. Others said Callahan was covering for the real hero who intervened. But among the younger residents and weary night shifters, the legend shifted. The helmet with the jagged teeth was no longer just a predator's grin. It was also a shield. The change in fear. Doctors still feared seeing him in the garage. Their hearts still raced when they caught a glimpse of that visor reflecting the overhead lights. But now, tangled up in that fear, there was something new. Hope. The figure hadn't spoken a word, but his silence carried meaning. He didn't strike without cause. He didn't appear at random. He appeared when he was needed. And though Dr. Callahan would never forget the pounding terror in his chest that night, he also knew this truth. The figure wasn't just watching. He was waiting. Whispers in the hallways. It didn't take long before Dr. Callahan's story became more than just talk in the physician's lounge. It became fuel for the hospital's whispered mythology. Nurses traded versions of it in the break room, and interns swapped retellings in hushed voices during night rounds. But with every new telling, details shifted. Some said the figure shielded Callahan with his whole body. Others swore he pulled the doctor into the shadows like a guardian wraith. The heart of the tale, however, never changed. The figure saved him. A second encounter. 2 weeks later, another story surfaced. This time it came from Dr. Levins, a young resident. She claimed she had been followed to her car by a man shouting at her. Agitated, unstable. Just as she fumbled with her keys, she saw movement from the far corner of the garage. The helmet. The teeth. Levins swore she froze, thinking she was about to die. But instead, the stranger who had been tailing her took one look at the armored silhouette and bolted into the stairwell without another word. The figure never touched him. He didn't have to. The unease. By now, even the guards stopped pretending they didn't know. They still never interfered, because no one wanted to. The figure was no longer seen as just a phantom, but something closer to a silent judge, and that unsettled the doctors most of all. If he had saved Callahan, if he had frightened off Levins's stalker, then what decided who was spared? The doctor's doubt. One late evening, Callahan sat alone in his office, staring at his reflection in the window. The story had made him into something of an accidental prophet. People asked him questions he couldn't answer. Why you? Did he choose you? What if he decides next time not to help? And Callahan wondered the same. Because in those long, terrifying seconds when he'd crouched behind the concrete wall with the armored figure's gloved hand on his shoulder, it hadn't just felt like protection. It had felt like judgment. Dr. Harlan was not the kind of man who enjoyed ghost stories. He dismissed them as superstition fueled by tired minds and caffeine fueled paranoia. Yet even he couldn't ignore the shift in tone sweeping through the hospital. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was fear mixed with reverence. That unsettled him more than anything. Because Harlan had secrets, the kind buried deep in charts, the kind nobody was supposed to notice. A missed dosage here, a falsified note there, one patient who never should have died. And as the stories of the figure spread, Harlan began to dread that if the figure really was a judge, he wouldn't pass. The parking garage. It was nearly midnight when Harlan left the hospital, walking briskly toward his car. The garage felt emptier than usual, though the hum of the lights seemed louder. That's when he saw him, the figure, standing at the far end, half in shadow, helmet tilted, painted teeth grinning in silence. Harlan's chest tightened, his heart hammered, not just from fear but guilt, as though the helmet could see through his lab coat down to the rot he carried inside. He quickened his pace, trying not to look, but the sound of heavy boots echoed faintly behind him. The encounter. When he reached his car, Harlan fumbled the keys, dropping them on the concrete. As he bent down to grab them, a shadow fell across his reflection in the driver's side window. He froze. Slowly he turned. The figure loomed only a few feet away, crouched low as though hunting, visor black and unreadable. One gloved hand rose, finger pressed against the jagged teeth of the helmet, commanding silence. Harlan's breath stuttered. His pulse roared in his ears. He swore the figure could hear it, could taste the guilt in every beat. For a long moment, neither moved. The garage felt suffocatingly still. And then, without a word, the figure straightened and stepped back into the darkness, vanishing like smoke. The aftermath. Harlan collapsed into his car seat, drenched in cold sweat. He should have felt relief, but he didn't, because he knew. The figure hadn't saved him. The figure hadn't threatened him either. The figure had simply seen him, and Harlan couldn't shake the feeling that next time, judgment might not be so merciful. The divide among doctors. Dr. Harlan didn't speak of what happened that night, but he didn't need to. Something in his eyes gave him away. He looked more tired than usual, more restless, as if the shadow of the figure still clung to him. And in the weeks that followed, the hospital began to fracture. Two camps. On one side were those who believed the figure was a guardian. They pointed to Dr. Callahan and Dr. Levins as proof, saved, spared, protected. The whispers in the lounge framed the helmet not as a monster's grin, but as a warning to outsiders. Don't harm the ones inside. On the other side were the fearful skeptics. To them, the figure wasn't a guardian at all, but an executioner in waiting. Dr. Harlan's haunted silence only added fuel. Those who had something to hide believed that if the figure looked at you too long, it was because he knew. The hospital became a place of hushed rumors and nervous glances toward the parking garage. A growing presence. More sightings followed, always in the liminal spaces, the top floor of the garage, the stairwells, the edge of the lot at night. Security cameras caught nothing but shadows, but staff swore they saw the jagged grin glint beneath the flickering lights. And curiously, incidents began to drop. No more late-night muggings. No more cars vandalized in the lot. Fewer patients harassed outside the ER doors. The staff began to wonder, was the figure not only watching them, but watching for them? The weight of fear. Still, fear remained. Dr. Harlan's heartbeat hadn't slowed since that night. He began to dread his shifts, not because of the patients, but because of the walk to his car. Every time he entered the garage, he braced himself for the reflection of painted teeth in his rearview mirror. And he wasn't alone, because whether protector or punisher, the figure had become more than a rumor. He was an unspoken presence that lived in the minds of every doctor and nurse, pushing their pulses faster the moment the lights dimmed and the garage doors closed. The legend was no longer just whispered in hallways, it was felt in every heartbeat. The vanishing men. The hospital was humming with tension. Every conversation behind closed doors circled back to the same subject, the figure in the helmet. Some staff clung to Callahan's story like a lifeline, insisting the armored shadow was a protector. Others whispered about Harlan's silence, about the way his hands shook now, about how he seemed more nervous leaving work than before. And then came the night that tipped the balance. Harlan's last shift. Harlan stayed later than usual, pacing his office long after his charts were finished. He told himself he wasn't stalling, but the truth gnawed at him. He dreaded the walk to the garage. Finally, he gathered his things, clutching his briefcase like a shield, and stepped into the fluorescent silence of the stairwell. His footsteps echoed, each one too loud. When he reached the bottom, he froze. The figure was there, standing between the rows of parked cars, still as a statue, visor reflecting the dim ceiling lights. The silent exchange, Harlan's mouth went dry. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His chest pounded so violently he thought he might collapse. The figure tilted its head slightly. It was a small motion, but it was enough. Enough to say, I see you. For one awful moment, Harlan thought this was it, that the judgment he had feared had finally come. He backed away, trembling, fumbling his keys. But before he could make it to his car, the lights overhead flickered, and when they came back, the figure was gone. So was Harlan. The aftermath. The next morning, Harlan's car was still in the garage. His briefcase lay open on the front seat, but Harlan himself was nowhere to be found. Security footage showed nothing, just flickering static during the hours he should have been leaving. The staff were shaken. Some swore the figure had taken him. Others whispered that maybe Harlan had fled, unable to bear the weight of his sins. But one thing everyone agreed on, the figure was no longer just a rumor. He was judge, jury, and perhaps something far darker. The breaking point. Dr. Harlan's disappearance spread through the hospital like a contagion. His car remained in the same spot in the garage, door cracked, briefcase abandoned. No one spoke of it loudly, but everyone knew. And with his absence, the hospital's staff began to split in ways deeper than whispers. Fear becomes division. Some insisted Harlan had simply run, cowardice or guilt pushing him to abandon his post. Others, however, were convinced the figure had taken him. The younger residents began to murmur that Harlan's judgment had finally come. His mistakes, whispered about behind closed doors, were catching up to him. The figure wasn't just watching anymore, he was deciding. For every doctor who believed the figure was a protector, another was certain he was an executioner. The hospital hallways, once filled with medical talk, now throbbed with suspicion. The midnight rounds, Nurse Velasquez was the first to voice what everyone felt but refused to say. It's not just about seeing him anymore, she whispered to Dr. Callahan one night. It's about who he chooses to let go. That same night, she swore she saw the figure again, silhouetted at the end of a long corridor that led to the garage. He didn't move, didn't approach. He only stood, visor reflecting the light, and tilted his head ever so slightly. Velasquez turned away, heart in her throat, and when she looked back, he was gone. Shadows of paranoia. The staff began to police themselves. Mistakes in charts were caught faster than ever. Medication errors were double-checked obsessively. Doctors who once covered for each other now scrutinized every detail, terrified of being noticed. It wasn't administration or policy driving this vigilance. It was the silent threat of the jagged-toothed helmet appearing in the periphery of the parking garage. Callahan's unease. Dr. Callahan, who once believed he'd been saved, now felt the weight of something else, responsibility. Had his survival marked him as worthy, or was he being watched more closely than the rest, his every decision weighed? Every time he walked to his car, his chest tightened with the memory of that gloved hand on his shoulder. He no longer knew if it was a gesture of reassurance or a reminder that his judgment too would come. The figure had become more than a phantom. He was the pulse in every chest, the silence in every hallway, the unseen arbiter in the shadows of the garage, and everyone in the hospital knew. It was only a matter of time before he chose again. The beloved doctor, Dr. Alara Vance, was the kind of physician everyone trusted. Calm in chaos, gentle with patients, relentless in the face of exhaustion. Even the most jaded surgeons softened around her. She was the kind of doctor who left little room for enemies, only respect. That's why her encounter with the figure shook the hospital to its core. The encounter. It was a stormy night when Dr. Vance finished her shift. Rain lashed against the windows, the sound of thunder rolling over the city as she walked the silent garage toward her car. Her shoes splashed lightly in shallow puddles. The fluorescent lights above flickered under the storm's strain. And then she saw him, the figure. Standing between her and her car, visor angled down, jagged painted teeth gleaming in the dim light. Her heart jumped, but unlike the others, she didn't freeze in terror. She steadied her breath, adjusted her bag on her shoulder, and spoke softly into the empty garage. "If you're here for me, then do it, but I don't regret helping people." The figure tilted his head slowly as though measuring the weight of her words. The gesture. He didn't advance, didn't vanish. Instead, he crouched low, visor nearly level with hers, as though studying her face. For a heartbeat, she swore she could feel him listening, though he never spoke a word. Then, in silence, he raised one gloved hand, not the command for silence this time, but an open palm, slow and deliberate, a gesture of acknowledgement. And then, just as the thunder cracked outside, the lights flickered and went out. When they buzzed back to life, the figure was gone. The aftermath. Dr. Vance lived to tell the story. Unlike Harland, unlike Callahan, she carried no fear in her retelling, only certainty. "He isn't random," she told the staff. "He isn't just hunting, he chooses." But the words divided the hospital further. Some found comfort, believing that if even Vance, pure of heart, was spared, then the figure truly was a protector. Others felt the chill deepen. If even the good doctors weren't safe, then perhaps the figure's criteria were unknowable, beyond morality, beyond reason. The shift in legend. The staff stopped whispering about whether he was real. His existence was no longer a rumor. It was a certainty. Now, the question that haunted them wasn't if they'd see him, but why. And as the days passed, more and more doctors found themselves glancing nervously at reflective surfaces, half expecting to see the jagged-toothed grin staring back at them. Because the figure had become more than a shadow in the garage. He was a silent verdict, waiting in the dark. The giant in the shadows. Dr. Callahan hoped, that after his first terrifying encounter, the figure would never appear to him again. But fate had other plans. The second encounter. It was just past midnight when Callahan left the hospital after another long shift. The garage was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing and flickering overhead. His footsteps echoed against the concrete, but then they weren't alone. A heavier rhythm joined his own, slow, deliberate. He turned, and there he was. The figure stepped out from the shadows of a concrete pillar, armored frame towering above Callahan. This time Callahan noticed the scale, the immensity of him. At least 6'8", maybe more. The kind of size that made Callahan instinctively take a step back. The jagged grin of the helmet angled down toward him. The standoff. For a moment, neither moved. Callahan felt his heart pound in his chest, that same awful awareness that the figure could hear it, measure it. The figure's presence was overwhelming up close. The dark armor etched with wear, the faint red glint of its chest plate, the visor black as obsidian. Callahan swallowed hard. His voice cracked as he tried to speak. "Why me? Why do you keep—" The figure tilted his head, visor reflecting the dim light, and simply stood there, silent, watching. The weight of height. Callahan felt small, fragile, beneath that looming form. The height wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. The figure didn't just tower above him in stature, but in authority. He was judge, sentinel, executioner, all wrapped into one. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, the figure lifted a gloved hand and pressed one finger against the painted teeth of the helmet. Silence. The departure. The lights flickered overhead. A hum filled the garage, and in the blink of an eye, the figure was gone. But Callahan knew better than to think it was over. His heartbeat hadn't slowed since that night. And now, a new realization gripped him. The figure wasn't just a shadow. He was a giant, and he was watching Callahan more closely than anyone else. Chosen. After that night, Dr. Callahan couldn't shake the image. The towering figure standing over him, visor angled down like a judge appraising his worth. 6'8", armored like a monster, silent like the grave. And yet, the figure hadn't touched him, hadn't harmed him. It was worse. He had stared. Whispers of favor. Word spread fast after Callahan confided to a colleague that he'd seen the figure again. The reactions were immediate and divided. "He's watching you, protecting you. Or maybe he's waiting for you to slip up." The staff began to look at Callahan differently. Some stood closer to him during late-night shifts, as though proximity to him meant safety. Others avoided him, afraid that if the figure appeared for Callahan, they might get caught in the crossfire of judgment. the pressure of eyes everywhere. Callahan went. He felt it. That same suffocating awareness, like being watched from just beyond his vision. Sometimes, in the reflections of polished windows, he swore he saw a jagged grin flash behind him. Other times, the faint echo of heavy boots in the garage made his chest tighten until he nearly doubled over. And yet, no one else saw him. Not this time. Not like Callahan did. The confrontation in the dark one evening, as Callahan reached his car, the garage lights flickered again. He froze, keys trembling in his hand. When they steadied, the figure was there, standing directly ahead. This close, his sheer size was undeniable. The armor creaked faintly as the figure shifted, gloved fists relaxed at his sides, visor angled down at the doctor as though waiting for him to speak. Callahan's throat dried. He forced the words out anyway. Why me? No answer. Only silence. The figure raised one hand, slowly, deliberately. For a moment, Callahan expected the familiar gesture of silence. But this time, the open palm lowered, not toward his mouth, but toward him, an offering. The choice Callahan's heart hammered against his ribs. He didn't move, didn't breathe. The figure's hand remained steady, impossibly patient, and in that dreadful moment, Callahan realized the truth that froze him more than anything else. The figure wasn't just watching him. The figure was choosing him. The hand extended, Dr. Callahan's hand hovered in the space between them, trembling, sweat slicking his palm. The armored figure's gauntlet remained steady, the open hand extended like an unyielding verdict. It wasn't just an offer. It was a demand. The touch finally, hesitantly, Callahan's fingertips brushed against the glove. The moment he made contact, a strange weight settled over him. Not physical, but psychological, like the crushing gravity of being seen in totality. Every memory, every mistake, every doubt screamed in his mind. His chest tightened as though his heartbeat was being measured not by a stethoscope, but by the towering sentinel itself. The figure didn't move, didn't squeeze. He simply held Callahan's hand in his palm, head tilted down as if cataloging everything about him. The unspoken verdict. Callahan wanted to pull away, but he couldn't. His fear locked him in place, and then, just as suddenly as it began, the hand released him. The figure straightened to his full height, casting Callahan into shadow. For a moment, Callahan swore he could hear something beyond silence. Not words, not sound, just a resonance in his chest, as if the figure had left something behind inside him. Then, without ceremony, the figure stepped back into the darkness. Gone. Aftermath. Callahan stumbled into his car, chest heaving, hands shaking so violently he dropped his keys twice before he could turn the ignition. He didn't drive home right away. He sat in the car with the engine running, staring into the rearview mirror, waiting for the jagged teeth to appear behind him. They didn't. But something inside him had changed. He couldn't name it, couldn't explain it. But the moment he touched that gauntlet, he felt it. The figure hadn't just been watching him, the figure had marked him. The figure's perspective. The hospital was a hive of sound at night. From the outside, it seemed silent, sterile halls, buzzing lights, the shuffle of tired feet. But inside his helmet, it was never quiet, because he could hear them. The heartbeats. Every doctor, every nurse, every staff member who crossed his path carried their secrets in the rhythm of their chest. His helmet translated the faintest vibrations into audible pulses, quickened when guilty, steady when calm, erratic when afraid. To the world, he was just a shadow with painted teeth, but to him, every heartbeat was an open book. Callahan's heart, a frantic drum, beating too fast, choking on fear but never on deceit. Harlan's, uneven, stuttering, heavy with the weight of buried lies. Vance, strong, steady, fearless, even when she faced him. He never needed them to speak. Their bodies confessed enough. The eyes in the dark, his visor was more than tinted glass. It was a machine, an array of optics that painted the garage in clarity. Where others saw only shadows, he saw outlines, breaths misting faintly in the air, heat rising from tired bodies. In total darkness, he saw as clearly as in daylight. The faint glow of nerves firing, the heat blooming in chests as adrenaline spiked. The parking garage to him was not empty. It was alive, pulsing with the concealed truths of those who walked through it. The choice. He did not hunt at random. Every appearance was calculated, every step from the shadows measured against what he heard. Fear alone did not condemn them. Fear was natural. But when fear was tangled with guilt, when the heartbeat faltered with dishonesty, when the rhythm told him they had harmed instead of healed, that was when he drew closer. That was why Harland had trembled beneath his stare. That was why Callahan had been spared. That was why Vance had been acknowledged. The mark. When Callahan touched his gauntlet, it wasn't mercy. It was a test. He had wanted to feel the heartbeat directly, skin to skin through the layers of trembling flesh and metal. And what he felt was truth. Callahan was terrified, but he was still clean, not innocent. No one was truly innocent, but not corrupted, so he let him live. Watching from the shadows. As the staff whispered and debated, as they argued whether he was protector or punisher, he stood unseen above them, in stairwells, on the rooftops, in the deepest corners of the garage. Their words didn't matter. Their opinions didn't sway him. Their hearts told him everything he needed to know. And until the balance was broken, until the guilty outnumbered the worthy, he would remain in silence, watching, listening, judging. Judgment Night. The figure had heard the guilty heartbeat before. He had followed it through sterile halls, listened to its uneven rhythm echo across the concrete of the garage. But tonight, there was no more doubt. Dr. Harland was working late, alone. That made it easier. The listening. From the shadows outside the stairwell, the figure waited. His helmet filtered through the noise of the hospital, the hum of generators, the shuffle of night staff, until he isolated it. Thump, thump. Thump, thump, a faltering beat, jagged and uneven, riddled with adrenaline. Not the healthy pounding of a man at work, but the guilty rhythm of one cornered by his own conscience. Inside the office, Harlan's voice trembled as he dictated false notes into a recorder, adjusting numbers, erasing mistakes, rewriting charts. The figure didn't need to hear the words to understand. His heartbeat confessed it all. The approach. He moved soundlessly. His boots should have echoed, but his armor was built for silence. The visor mapped the room ahead in glowing outlines. Harlan hunched over his desk, hands shaking, sweat gleaming against pale skin. The door creaked open. Harlan froze. Who's there? The figure stepped into the light. 6'8" of shadow and steel, jagged teeth painted across the helmet, visor glowing faintly red as it locked onto the faltering rhythm of Harlan's heart. The confrontation. Harlan staggered back, knocking over his chair. Stay away from me, I haven't done anything wrong. But his chest betrayed him. The frantic thudding, the stuttering pace, it screamed louder than his words ever could. The figure's helmet amplified it until it filled the silence like a drumbeat of guilt. He advanced, each step deliberate, each one heavier than the last. Harlan backed himself into the corner, hands raised like a child begging mercy. The figure raised one gloved hand, not in violence, but in judgment. A single finger pressed to the jagged teeth of his helmet. Silence. The verdict. For a moment, the room held still. Then the figure reached down and seized Harlan's wrist. His gauntlet tightened, not enough to break, but enough to feel the pulse hammering beneath the skin. The guilty rhythm rattled against the armor, confirming everything. The visor tilted down, inches from Harlan's face. He could see his own reflection in the black glass, wide-eyed and sweating. And then the lights flickered. When they steadied, Harlan was gone. His office was empty, save for the scattered papers on the floor and the echo of a heartbeat that had fallen silent. The aftermath. The staff found Harlan's office the next morning. His notes incomplete, his car still in the garage. But no Harlan. The figure had delivered his judgment. Where Harlan had gone, no one could say. Some swore he was dead. Others whispered he had been taken somewhere worse. The figure never clarified. He never needed to, because the silence he left behind was louder than words. Weeks passed, then months. The hospital settled back into its routines, codes called, lives saved, losses mourned, but something subtle changed around Dr. Callahan. He moved differently now, slower, more deliberate, as if he had learned that not all power rushed and not all danger announced itself. He stopped parking near the elevators. Instead, he chose the lower levels, the quiet ones, concrete thick enough to swallow sound. Colleagues joked about it once. Cardio by stairs, huh? And he smiled, said nothing, kept walking. Some nights he felt it again, not fear, awareness. A pressure in the air, a sense of being measured and already understood. When it happened, his heart would instinctively slow, as if responding to a rhythm it remembered. Once during a late shift, the lights flickered in the garage, just for a second, long enough for Callahan to freeze mid-step, breath caught in his chest. A shadow shifted near a pillar, tall, still, watching. He didn't turn his head, didn't reach for his phone, didn't run. He simply placed a hand over his chest, grounding himself, and exhaled slowly. The shadow didn't move closer. Didn't need to. By morning, security reports would show nothing unusual, no anomalies, no intrusions, same as always. But Dr. Callahan would wash his hands longer than usual, steadying them under warm water, feeling his pulse settle into a familiar calm. He understood now. The figure wasn't haunting the hospital. It was guarding something. And on rare, quiet nights, when the city slept and concrete remembered every footstep, the figure listened again, through walls and armor and silence, to the small human heart that had once rested beneath his own. Still alive, still steady, approved. The garage was almost empty that night, the kind of quiet that hummed instead of resting. Dr. Callahan had just locked his car when the air shifted. Pressure, weight, the unmistakable sense of presence. He didn't jump this time. Concrete scraped softly behind him. A shadow detached itself from the pillar and resolved into armor, tall and dark, swallowing the dim lights whole. The helmet tilted just slightly as if focusing. Callahan turned slowly. They stood there facing each other, neither surprised, not anymore. The figure stepped closer, movements controlled, careful despite his size. One gloved hand lifted, not a threat, not a command, and came to rest against the doctor's chest, directly over his heart. The touch was steady, grounding, warm through the glove. Callahan's breath hitched out of reflex, then eased. His pulse slowed, falling into a rhythm that felt guided. The helmet dipped closer. "I know your heartbeat," the figure said quietly. His voice was low, filtered, but unmistakably calm. "I remember it." Callahan swallowed, throat dry. You could have erased me," he said. Made sure I never spoke. The hand didn't press harder. It stayed exactly where it was. "I didn't bring you back to silence you," the figure replied. "I brought you back because you chose restraint when you had none forced upon you." The hand lifted just enough to tap once, gentle, deliberate, over the doctor's sternum. "You listened," the figure continued. "You didn't run. You didn't exploit what you were given. That matters." Callahan met the dark visor, heart steady now, unafraid. "So what happens now?" he asked. For a moment, the figure said nothing. Then he stepped back, space returning between them. "Now," he said, turning toward the shadows, "you live." The armor melted back into darkness, leaving the garage empty once more. Dr. Callahan stood alone, hand resting over his chest, feeling his heartbeat. Slow, calm, undeniably his. And for the rest of his life, whenever he placed a stethoscope against another human heart, he listened a little differently, as if he knew someone else was listening too. They stood there longer than either expected. Concrete breathed around them, damp and cold, lights humming overhead. The armored figure's hand rested over his own chest now, mirroring the place he had touched on the doctor earlier, while Dr. Callahan watched the slow rise and fall of the massive armor. For the first time, the figure didn't fade back into shadow. "You're not afraid anymore," the figure said. Callahan considered that. His heart was beating faster than normal, but not wildly, not panicked. He nodded. "I'm aware," he replied. "There's a difference." The helmet tilted, just a fraction. Approval again. "I intervene when balance tips," the figure said. "Fear makes people careless. Carelessness gets them hurt. You didn't let fear own you." "And you?" Callahan asked. "What makes you stay?" A pause. Longer this time. "This place leaks vulnerability," the figure answered. "Hospitals attract it. I listen for it." Silence settled. Not awkward. Intentional. Callahan finally broke it. "If I ever tell anyone, you won't," the figure said, gently certain. "You understand weight?" He stepped back, boots scraping once against concrete. The space between them returned, but something else remained, intangible and steady. As the figure turned away, Callahan spoke again, quieter. "Will I see you again?" The helmet angled over one shoulder. "If your heart races for the wrong reasons," the figure said, "yes." Then he was gone. No flash, no sound, just absence where presence had been. Dr. Callahan stood alone in the garage, one hand over his chest, feeling his heartbeat settle into its familiar rhythm. Above him, the hospital lights burned on, and somewhere in the concrete arteries below it, something listened, calm, patient, and very much alive. Time moved forward, but differently now. Dr. Callahan stopped thinking of the hospital as a building and started thinking of it as a body. Elevators were arteries. Hallways were nerves. The parking garage, deep and layered, was the rib cage, protective, shadowed, strong, and somewhere within it, a guardian listened. He never spoke of the encounters, yet traces of them leaked into his work. He caught arrhythmias earlier than machines did. He sensed panic before monitors screamed. Nurses joked that he had pre-code instincts. Callahan just smiled and said experience sharpened awareness. Late one night, a patient coded hard, violently. The room flooded with motion, hands, voices, urgency. But Callahan felt something else underneath the chaos, a pressure, a familiar stillness pushing back against disorder. They saved the patient. Afterward, as Callahan washed his hands, he noticed his reflection trembling slightly, not from stress, but from recognition. His heart was calm, too calm for what had just happened. That night, as he walked the lower level of the garage, he finally spoke into the dark without stopping. "You heard that one too, didn't you?" Silence answered first. Then, from somewhere high and unseen, a presence settled, not close enough to startle, not far enough to doubt. "Yes," the figure said. "You steadied the room." Callahan exhaled. "I learned from you." A pause, then something like amusement, barely there. "You learned from listening," the figure corrected. "I only reminded you." They didn't face each other this time. They didn't need to. "Others like me exist," the figure continued. "Most never notice. Some notice and panic. Very few adapt." "And me?" Callahan asked. "You stayed human," the figure said. "That matters." The weight lifted. The presence withdrew. Callahan reached his car, sat down, and rested his head briefly against the steering wheel, hand over his chest. His heart beat strong, ordinary, alive. Above him, the hospital continued to glow, fragile and fierce all at once. Below it, unseen and unannounced, something stood watch. Not as a monster, not as a myth, but as a keeper of rhythms. And Dr. Callahan quietly carried the knowledge with him for the rest of his days, listening not just to hearts, but to the spaces between their beats, where silence could still mean safety. The night it happened was unremarkable, always a dangerous adjective. Dr. Callahan finished late, charting bleeding into tomorrow, his mind already halfway home. The parking garage breathed its usual concrete chill, fluorescent lights humming like tired insects. He walked alone, cover his arm, footsteps echoing just a little too cleanly. That was when the echoes multiplied. Two sets. Fast. Poorly disguised. "Hey, Doc," one voice called, false friendly, sharp around the edges. Callahan stopped. Not froze. Stopped. Years of emergency rooms had taught him the difference. He turned slowly. Two men stepped out from between pillars, hands hidden, eyes too alert. In that instant, before fear could bloom, his chest tightened. Not with panic, but with warning. A pressure. A presence. The first gunshot cracked the air. The sound never reached him. Metal moved faster than intent. Something dark dropped from above with the weight of certainty. The armored figure landed between Callahan and the men, boots striking concrete like a verdict. The second shot hit square in the chest and rang out like a hammer on an anvil. The figure didn't flinch. The bullet flattened, skittering across the floor. Both attackers froze. One swore. The other fired again, wild this time. Two impacts. Three. Each one sparked uselessly against the armor's chest plate, leaving only shallow scars like insults brushed away. The figure turned its helmeted head slowly toward them. "No," it said, not loud, not angry, just final. They ran. Their footsteps dissolved into chaos, leaving only the hum of lights and the doctor's suddenly very loud heartbeat. Callahan stood there, breath shallow now, reality catching up. The armored figure turned to him and, gently, almost carefully, placed a gloved hand over Callahan's chest, right where his heart thudded. "Easy," the figure said. "You're safe." Callahan swallowed. They shot you." "Yes. And you're still standing." The figure glanced down at its chest, where faintly deformed slugs rested on the concrete. The armor was made for worse than fear. "Bulletproof," Callahan whispered. A pause. Then, quietly, "among other things." The hand lifted. The pressure eased. Callahan realized his heart was already slowing, obeying a calm it recognized. Before he could ask the 100 questions lining up in his mind, the figure stepped back. "You were never meant to know this way," it said, "but now you do." "And now?" Callahan asked. The figure tilted its head, that almost smile returning in the angle of its posture. "Now you keep walking and listening." Then it moved, upward impossibly, vanishing into shadow and structure, leaving behind silence, dented bullets, and a doctor who would never again mistake armor for invincibility. The garage went quiet again, the way it pretends nothing important ever happens there. Dr. Callahan crouched, knees protesting, and picked up the first bullet. It was warm, still holding a memory of violence that never quite succeeded. The lead had folded in on itself like a thought interrupted mid-sentence. No penetration, no shrapnel, just refusal. He turned it between his fingers, eyes narrowing, not with fear now, but with professional curiosity. Trauma surgeon instincts kicked in automatically. Velocity, impact angle, energy dissipation. Impossible, he murmured. He gathered the others, three in total, each uniquely deformed, each telling the same story. Something far stronger than steel had been standing in the way. He slipped them into his coat pocket with care, like specimens rather than evidence. Not trophies. Proof. At home, long past midnight, he cleaned them gently in the sink, laid them out under his desk lamp, and studied them like relics. He photographed them, measured them, weighed them, compared the deformation patterns to ballistic data he knew by heart. Nothing matched. Eventually, he stopped analyzing and simply sat back, the room quiet except for the slow, steady rhythm in his chest. He placed one bullet against his sternum, not pressing, just resting it there, and closed his eyes. He remembered the hand on his chest, the way his heart had listened. These stayed outside, he said softly to the empty room. Just like you said. He wrapped the bullets in gauze, because of course he did, and placed them in a small case at the back of his desk drawer. Not locked, not hidden, just kept. He didn't tell the police, didn't log the incident, didn't even write it down. Some things he understood now were meant to be carried, not shared. And somewhere, high above the city, armor shifted in the dark. The figure felt the choice, though it hadn't been there to see it. A faint, approving stillness followed. The doctor slept better than he had in years. They met again without planning it, because they always did. The garage lights hummed. Rain tapped faintly above concrete. Dr. Callahan stood by his car longer than necessary, fingers resting over his coat pocket where the wrapped bullets still lived. He didn't look around. He didn't call out. He listened. The presence arrived like pressure equalizing. The armored figure stepped from shadow to structure, massive and controlled, helmet angled slightly downward, not threatening, not distant. Close enough that Callahan felt it in his chest before he heard a word. No one, the figure said, voice low and steady, should ever hurt a doctor. Callahan swallowed. You don't even know me that well. The helmet tilted, just a fraction. I know your hands, the figure replied. I know how they move when time is running out. I know how your heart changes when someone else's is failing. Silence stretched, thick but not uncomfortable. They fired at you, Callahan said quietly. They missed, the figure corrected. They didn't, Callahan said. You stood there. Yes. The word carried weight, intention. Doctors preserve life, the figure continued. You step between damage and loss every day. That earns protection. Callahan exhaled, a sound halfway between a laugh and something dangerously close to emotion. That's a big rule. The figure's helmet turned toward the darkness of the garage where tire marks and oil stains told older, uglier stories. So is yours, he said. First, do no harm. A pause. Sometimes, Callahan said, that means standing still while something worse breaks instead. The armored figure placed a gloved hand briefly carefully over Callahan's chest again, not pressing, just acknowledging the rhythm beneath. I hear your heart, he said. It has never asked to hurt anyone. The hand withdrew. The pressure lifted. Then we agree? Callahan said. Yes, the figure replied. An agreement is enough. By the time Callahan looked up again, the space was empty, only concrete, light, and the faint echo of safety settling back into place. He got into his car, started the engine, and drove home slowly. His heart beat steady. Protected, not by armor this time, but by the quiet certainty that somewhere nearby something listened and would always step in if it ever needed to. The thought crept in the way professional habits always did, uninvited, persistent, impossible to ignore. Dr. Callahan didn't want to be curious, he simply was. The armor haunted his mind the way rare injuries haunted surgeons, angles, layers, force distribution. He replayed the bullets striking, the way the figure hadn't flinched, the sound, not metal ringing, but something deeper, muted, absorbed. Whatever that armor was, it wasn't just protection, it was intention made solid. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. No shadows lingered. No pressure in the air. Callahan almost convinced himself he'd missed his chance. Then, one night, the elevator stalled between levels. The lights stayed on, the air stayed calm, but his heart, traitorous, perceptive, shifted rhythm. "You're thinking loudly," the familiar voice said. Callahan didn't turn. "That's never stopped you before." The doors opened onto an unused sublevel. Unfinished concrete, warning stripes, silence so clean it felt prepared. The armored figure stood there already. "You want to understand," the figure said. Callahan hesitated. "I don't want to interfere." "You won't," the figure replied. "You won't cut. You won't take. You will only look. A beat." "I trust that," he added. That did it. Callahan nodded once. The figure turned slightly, presenting the armor, not in challenge, but in permission. Up close, it was even more unsettling. The surface wasn't smooth. It shifted subtly under the light, layered like muscle memory rather than steel. No seams where seams should be. No visible fasteners. Callahan approached slowly, hands held up out of habit. "May I?" "Yes." He touched it, just 2 fingers at first. The armor was cool, but not cold. It responded almost imperceptibly, redistributing pressure beneath his touch. Not alive exactly, but listening. "Incredible," Callahan breathed. "Reactive. Energy dispersive. Adaptive density. This isn't just bulletproof. It learns. It remembers," the figure corrected. Callahan looked up sharply. "From every impact?" "Yes." "That explains the deformation patterns," Callahan said, already mentally cataloging. "Each bullet failed differently because the armor adjusted mid-impact." The figure said nothing. Callahan caught himself smiling, wide, genuine, unguarded. "You're wearing a history of every threat that didn't get through." "Yes." Silence followed, comfortable, reverent. Finally, Callahan stepped back. "Thank you," he said. "I won't tell anyone." "I know," the figure replied. The elevator chimed behind them. When Callahan turned back, the space was empty again. Later, alone in his car, Callahan placed a hand over his chest and laughed quietly. Some doctors got rare cases. Some got miracles. He had examined something that shouldn't exist and been trusted to walk away without trying to own it. His heart beat steady, satisfied. And somewhere in the city's bones, armor shifted, unchanged, unburdened, exactly where it belonged. That night, something subtle changed between them. Not closeness, not distance, but alignment. Dr. Callahan began noticing small, deliberate absences. A malfunctioning light fixed without a work order. A stairwell door that should have slammed instead eased shut. A security report quietly rewritten from incident to maintenance issue. The hospital kept breathing smoothly, unaware of the adjustments being made on its behalf, and Callahan felt it when the figure was near. Not fear anymore, not awe, awareness. One evening, long after his shift ended, he found himself alone in an on-call room, rolling one of the deformed bullets between his fingers. He didn't know why he'd brought it with him. Maybe habit, maybe instinct. "You don't need to keep proof," the voice said gently. Callahan didn't jump. "I know, but it reminds me where the line is." The figure stood near the doorway, armor dim in the low light, helmet angled not down this time, but level, equal. "You examine bodies," the figure said. "I examine threats." Callahan smiled faintly. "We're both very selective." A pause. "You never asked why I chose this place," the figure added. Callahan considered. "I assumed you'd tell me when it mattered." "That's why," the figure replied. Silence settled, thick with meaning. "There will come a night," the figure said, "when I won't be able to intervene quickly, when danger moves faster than I do." Callahan's jaw tightened. "Then you want me to run?" "No," the figure said. "I want you to listen." The helmet tipped just enough to be deliberate. "Your heart already knows when to move." Callahan nodded once. "And if I can't? Then you will survive," the figure said, "because you matter." That landed harder than Callahan expected. He looked down, steadying himself. When he looked up again, the room was empty, but the air still felt guarded. Callahan placed the bullet back into his pocket and stood, rolling his shoulders like a man preparing for a long shift. He understood now. He wasn't being watched. He was being backed up, and somewhere beyond walls and wiring, armor waited. Not for orders, not for thanks, but for the moment when a heartbeat needed defending. The night broke its own rules. It happened fast, too fast for instincts, too fast for listening. Footsteps, shouting. the sharp, unforgiving crack of a gunshot echoing off concrete. Dr. Callahan felt the impact before the pain, a heavy, concussive force to his stomach that stole the air from his lungs. He hit the ground hard, hands instinctively pressing where warmth spread beneath his coat. The world narrowed, tunneled, dimmed. The bad guys fled. Tires screamed. Silence rushed back in, cruel and empty. Callahan's vision blurred, lights smearing into halos, his heartbeat thundered, loud, panicked, disorganized. Then the pressure changed. The garage didn't feel empty anymore. Through fading vision, he saw the armored figure step into view, movements unhurried but absolute. The helmet angled down, not in fear this time, but in something unmistakably close to urgency. The figure knelt, carefully, reverently. A massive, gloved hand slid beneath Callahan's shoulders, another under his legs, lifting him as though weight no longer applied. Callahan tried to speak, couldn't, tried to listen. Everything was noise. The last thing he registered before darkness took him was motion, fast now toward the hospital doors. He woke to quiet, real quiet. The kind only hospitals manage at odd hours when machines whisper and the world holds its breath. His stomach ached dully, wrapped tight. Tubes, lines, monitors. Alive, very alive, and standing in the corner of the room, half in shadow, unmistakable even without menace, the armored figure. Callahan's heart jumped, then steadied as if reassured by recognition. You were shot, the figure said calmly. You lost consciousness. I brought you inside. Callahan swallowed. You broke your rule. Yes. A pause. You mattered more. The words hit harder than the bullet had. How bad? Callahan asked. You were stabilized, the figure replied. Skilled hands, familiar hands. Callahan huffed weakly. Figures. Silence settled again, but this time it felt guarded, protected. I will stand watch, the figure said. No one enters without my permission. No one harms you while you heal. Callahan shifted slightly, wincing. You don't have to. I know, the figure interrupted gently. That's why I will. The helmet angled toward the monitor, listening to the steady rhythm displayed there. Your heart fought hard, he added. It did not give up. Callahan closed his eyes, exhaustion washing over him. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to stay alert. Then, he murmured, I guess I finally get to be the patient. Yes, the figure said, and you are very bad at resting. A faint smile tugged at Callahan's mouth as sleep reclaimed him. The room remained still, armor unmoving, listening, standing guard, not over a hospital this time, but over one man whose heartbeat had always been worth protecting. I remained long after visiting hours ended, long after the hallway sounds thinned to the soft language of night staff and rolling carts. Humans believe stillness means inaction. It does not. While he slept, I listened outward and inward at once, to the cadence of his heart, to the building systems, to the city pressing faintly against the hospital's walls. Threat has a signature. It always does. None cross the threshold. Once, a nurse paused outside the room, frowning slightly, sensing something she couldn't name. I shifted just enough for the light to catch the armor and then stepped back into shadow. Her heart spiked, then steadied. She told herself she was tired and moved on. Good. He stirred near dawn, pain then orientation. His rhythm wobbled and corrected, resilient. I adjusted my stance so he would see me when his eyes opened fully, not suddenly, not looming. Timing matters when fear and trust are close neighbors. You stayed? He said quietly. Yes. You didn't have to. I know. That answer satisfied him. It always had. Over the next days, I learned the sound of recovery, the gradual confidence returning to a heartbeat, the way pain dulls and resolve sharpens. He slept more. He asked fewer questions. He watched me sometimes, curiosity returning like a reflex he'd never quite turned off. On the third night, he spoke again. You cross lines for me. I considered the statement. I choose, I said. Lines are tools, not laws. A faint smile. His heart warmed, subtle, but unmistakable. When he was strong enough to stand, I withdrew a step. When he walked, I withdrew another. Protection adapts, it does not smother. Before I left, I placed a hand over the armor at my chest, once, then nodded to him. A gesture he understood now. I'll listen, he said. I know, I replied. I exited the way I always do, without announcement, without spectacle. The hospital resumed its ordinary breathing. He returned to healing others, carrying a scar that would remind him he had been on the table and lived. From then on, when danger passed too close to the places where medicine keeps watch, I arrived earlier. I stood firmer. I learned faster. Because some hearts once heard are not forgotten. And this one, steady, stubborn, human, had earned the dark standing between it and the world. The suggestion caught me off guard. "You don't rest," he said, not accusing, not curious, just observant. His voice was weaker than usual, still carrying the rough edge of healing, but his heart was steady, confident, certain. "I do not tire," I replied. He looked at me the way doctors do when patients lie, patient, unconvinced, already adjusting the plan. "You stand," he said. "Constantly. That's not the same thing." Silence stretched. I could have ignored it. I often did. Stillness was my default state, motion my choice. But then he added gently, "You don't have to leave to rest." I angled my helmet slightly. "If I sit, I cannot respond as quickly." "You can," he said, tapping the edge of the bed weakly. "Right here. You'd still be close. Closer, actually." His heartbeat didn't accelerate when he said it. No fear, no manipulation, just concern, offered the same way he offered care to anyone else. It was unfamiliar. After a moment, I moved. Carefully, I lowered myself to the chair beside his bed. The armor adjusted automatically, redistributing weight, minimizing sound. The chair protested quietly, then held. I sat. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His heart softened, just a little. "There," he said. "See? Still on watch." "Yes," I admitted, still listening. He smiled faintly and closed his eyes again, reassured not by my presence alone, but by the fact that I had accepted care without resistance. I remained seated through the night. For the first time in longer than I could measure, I allowed stillness without vigilance layered on top of it. Not asleep, not inactive, just present. And beside me, the doctor's heartbeat kept its slow, steady rhythm, no longer guarded by force alone, but by something quieter. Trust. Recovery came slowly but steadily. Days turned into weeks. The wound closed, strength returned, and the chaos of emergency medicine pulled Dr. Callahan back into its rhythm. At first, he walked carefully, one hand unconsciously hovering near his abdomen. Then the hesitation faded, replaced by the quiet confidence of someone who had stood at the edge and returned. All that remained was a scar, a small one, just below his ribs, pale and cleanly healed. It ached sometimes in cold weather, a faint reminder of that night in the garage. But to Callahan, it meant more than injury. It meant he had been protected. It meant he had been chosen to live. He never hid it. Sometimes when alone, he would rest his fingers against the mark, remembering the moment his heartbeat had faltered and the presence that refused to let it stop. Back to work. Returning fully to the hospital felt different. He moved through the halls with deeper awareness now. He listened more closely to patients, lingered longer at bedsides, caught subtle warning signs others missed. The experience had sharpened him, not hardened, but clarified. Staff noticed the change. "Near-death perspective," one nurse joked. Callahan only smiled. If they knew the truth, that somewhere in the hospital's bones something still listened for danger, they might never sleep again. Hesh, the garage guardian, and the figure remained, not always seen, rarely confirmed, but present. Security cameras occasionally glitched on the lower levels, motion sensors tripped without explanation. The late-night vandalism that once plagued the parking structure vanished entirely. Even the air in the garage felt different, quietly guarded. Sometimes, when Callahan walked alone at night, he would feel that familiar pressure in the air, a subtle shift, a steadying presence. He never searched for it. He simply acknowledged it. A slight nod toward a shadowed pillar, a calm hand over his chest, a heartbeat kept steady. And somewhere in the darkness, armor listened in return. The silent agreement. They rarely spoke now. They didn't need to. The figure stood watch from the edges of the hospital's world, the concrete depths, the silent stairwells, the spaces where harm tried to enter unnoticed. The hospital breathed above him, full of fragile lives and fragile hopes, and he guarded its rhythm with tireless patience. Doctors healed, he protected, balance maintained. One late evening, after finishing a long shift, Dr. Callahan paused at the entrance of the parking garage. The lights flickered faintly, the air settled. He placed a hand over his scar. His heart beat slow, steady, alive. From somewhere in the shadows, unseen but unmistakable, a presence acknowledged the rhythm. The guardian still watched. And the hospital, unaware of the silent sentinel beneath its floors, remained safe, one heartbeat at a time.